Hey guys, and welcome on in for today's video where I'm going to walk you through my current prediction on what I think is going to happen in the Senate in 2020. Now, there's 35 Senate races, and I'm going to talk about every single one of them. This map is a little bit more favorable to the Democrats than what they had with that brutally tough map in the midterms of 2018, and as a result, there are some possibilities that the Democrats could perhaps pick up some seats. Now, we see when you take those 35 seats out of the equation, there's 35 Democrats that are not up for election in 2020, and really it's 33 Democrats and then 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats, those being Bernie Sanders as well as Angus King, and then you have 30 Republicans that are not up for election in 2020. So the rest of the 35 seats, like I said, going to go through every single one of them and predict it either one way or the other, whether I see the Democrats or the Republicans taking each race. So starting in Alaska, the Republicans have the incumbent advantage with Dan Sullivan, and this is a pretty consistently safe statewide for the Republicans, especially with that incumbent advantage. That's likely to be a safe one there for the Republicans. Going down to Oregon, likely very safe for the Democrats. They also have the incumbent advantage themselves with the Democrat Jeff Merkley. Idaho, one of the more conservative Republican-leaning states in the country, and they also have the incumbent advantage with Jim Rich. And then we go over to Montana. Republican incumbent Steve Daines likely to go on and win this one. However, I will say if Steve Bullock, for whatever reason, decides that he doesn't want to run for president anymore, maybe he wants to run for the Senate instead, then I think that becomes a much more interesting situation that could possibly go either way. But with Steve Daines going against a lesser-known Democrat or somebody that hasn't proven that they can win statewide in Montana, going to be giving this one as a likely situation towards the Republicans. Now moving down to Wyoming, where you're going to have a party nominee for the Republicans and a party nominee for the Democrats, but either way, it's going to be a safe one for Wyoming, kind of like the neighboring state of Idaho. A very safe statewide result, almost certainly for the Republicans. Now going down to Colorado, and this is a possible pickup for the Democrats, and I'm giving it as a lean right now to the Democrats. We just saw the new approval numbers come out from the third quarter of 2019, and Cory Gardner's numbers not looking good, underwater, very low, actually lower approval numbers in Colorado than even what President Trump has. And of course, we know that Trump went on and lost the state of Colorado back in 2016 to Hillary Clinton. Cory Gardner seems like a dead man walking at this point in time. The writing is on the wall. Very low approval numbers. All the polls that we're seeing, even him just against a generic Democrat, he's losing in general by rather significant margins. If he goes up against John Hickenlooper, for instance, that makes it even tougher because Hickenlooper, very well known statewide, and drastically reduces the incumbency advantage. Kind of in contrast, we saw the reverse back in 2018 in Florida, where the governor, Rick Scott, the Republican governor, was able to diminish the incumbent advantage of Bill Nelson, the Democrat in Florida, and that was really helpful in the Republicans picking up that Senate seat down there in Florida. So with Hickenlooper potentially here going against Gardner, that can happen. I'm not going to completely write off Romanoff. He's challenging Hickenlooper from the left. We'll see what Colorado decides to do in their primary. Going to be an uphill battle, though, for the progressive going against somebody who has the funding and name recognition that Hickenlooper brings into this scenario. But going to be giving that one as a lean over to the Democrats, and that would be a pickup. And then also going down to Arizona. Technically, it's an incumbency advantage with Martha McSally, but she's never won statewide in Arizona for the Senate. She lost in 2018. She was appointed to this Senate seat, and I actually think that her potential matchup here against astronaut Mark Kelly could be even tougher than what she faced with Sinema in 2018, and as a result, going to be giving Arizona as a slight lean over to the Democrats. The demographics are getting better for the Democratic Party in Arizona. We saw that in 2018 with them picking up a Senate seat, and we could be going into a situation post-2020 where Arizona is officially a 2 Democrat Senate seat state, which is what we're seeing in some of these southwestern states that have been trending towards the Democrats. Moving one state over to New Mexico, and it's going to be a party nominee from both sides, but at the end of the day, New Mexico has been really strong for the Democrats over the past decade plus, and again, in this southwestern region of the country, demographics are a big reason why it's just becoming more and more consistently stronger for the Democrats in these areas, including New Mexico. It's likely to be a safe seat for the Democratic Party. Now going into the Great Plains states, we have South Dakota up here, and they're going to have an incumbent with Mike Rounds, going to be a very safe one for the Republicans. Ben Sass, the incumbent Republican in Nebraska, very likely to be safe for him. In Kansas, It actually could be a situation where the Democrats pick this one up if it's a best case scenario for them. The Republicans would nominate Chris Kobach, which is a definite possibility to keep in mind. Now, we saw Kobach lose statewide in the governor's race as a Republican, and he could very well lose statewide as a Republican in the 2020 Senate race if he's able to go on and win the Republican primary. But we don't know who's won that primary at this point in time. We'll see how that race shapes out, and as a result, going to be giving this one as a likely for the Republicans. Now, if it is Chris Kobach, that totally changes the arithmetic here, but if it's not Chris Kobach, then it's probably going to be a safer situation for the Republicans to win statewide in Kansas in 2020. Now moving down to Oklahoma with Jim Inhofe, the incumbent Republican, very likely to be a safe one, of course, for the Republicans there in Oklahoma. In Texas, one of these southwestern states that is becoming more competitive, they do have the incumbency advantage with John Cornyn, and his approval numbers were decently solid in this most recent report that just came out. Going to be giving this one as likely to the Republicans. Now, if it was a Beto O'Rourke scenario where he was running against Cornyn, that totally changes how this one could possibly play out. But at this point in time, if it's Cornyn against a lesser-known Democrat, then you would feel like the Republicans would still have a pretty good chance at going and claiming this seat, or not reclaiming it, but continuing to hold this particular Senate seat in Texas. Moving over to Louisiana, the incumbency advantage with the Republican in Bill Cassidy, and likely to be a safe one there for the Republicans. And then also in Arkansas with the incumbent Tom Cotton, likely to be safe for the Republicans. Cindy Hyde-Smith won the special election in Mississippi back in 2018, and she would probably go on and continue to take that one in the state of Mississippi. Now, Alabama is actually a little bit more interesting than some of these states that I just went through because the incumbency advantage goes to the Democrats here with Doug Jones, who won that special election not all that long ago. Now, if he's not going against Roy Moore this time around, it makes things a lot tougher, and especially with this being a general election situation instead of a special election, that means much higher voter turnout, which is going to make it tougher for the Democrat as well. Going to be giving this one as a lean over to the Republicans, and I'm just going to keep it out of lean for now because Doug Jones is actually to the positive with his approval numbers in Alabama, so he at least has a puncher's chance to maybe make this one interesting and competitive, and if he's going against Roy Moore, could very well go on and continue to keep this Senate seat for the Democrats. Now going over to Georgia, where they're going to have two Senate elections in 2020. David Perdue, the incumbent, he had really strong approval numbers that just came out, which made me feel like this one is a little bit more likely for the Republicans than maybe what I felt about it earlier in the year. The special election, just going to be giving it as a lean, while the incumbent David Perdue going to be giving it as likely to the Republicans. We'll see who the two nominees are in that special election race. Maybe if Stacey Abrams ever decides to throw her hat in the ring in one of these Senate races, that could make things potentially gainable for the Democrats, or we'll see who the other candidates are that can run in those primaries, and whoever ends up taking the primary for the Democrats, see if they're strong or not in the polling against David Perdue, for instance, the incumbent, or maybe over in that special election. We'll see how that one plays out. And then we have Lindsey Graham, the incumbent Republican from South Carolina, likely to be a pretty safe one for the Republicans. In Tennessee, going to be an open one between a party nominee on both sides, but with Tennessee, you're going to be putting that one more than likely as very safe for the Republicans. We thought it might be a pretty close race in 2018 in Tennessee, with it being a party nominee on both sides, and the fact that on the Democrat side, they had a former governor and a popular former governor as the Democrat, but he actually lost by double digits, so not a strong sign at all for the Democrats, where they felt like they had the perfect candidate to perhaps pick up a Senate seat in Tennessee, and that didn't end up being the case. Now going up one state to Kentucky, you have the most disapproved of senator out of all 100 senators in the U.S. Senate, and that is Mitch McConnell, the incumbent Republican. That makes things perhaps a little bit more interesting, but I'm still going to be giving this one as likely to the Republicans. We'll see who the Democrats nominate. And just given the fact that McConnell is so unpopular, that could potentially make things interesting. And we're actually going to get a governor's race pretty soon here in the state of Kentucky, where the Democrats are looking like they have a really good shot at picking that one up. And maybe that's a sign of things to come. But still, McConnell, he has an incredible amount of money that he can tap into for this race. Again, he's very well known. He has that incumbency advantage. It's going to be an uphill battle for whoever the Democratic nominee is. And you might say, well, he's so far underwater, he has no chance. Well, the counter to that is in New Jersey in 2018. you had Bob Menendez, who's also one of the most disapproved of senators, and he ended up winning rather comfortably in his reelection bid. So you can have a state that's partisan leaning enough to one side where even if their incumbent for that side is very disapproved of, they can still overcome that and still have success electorally as they go on and win those statewide elections. Moving over one state to Illinois, you have a Democrat incumbent with Dick Durbin, who isn't necessarily the most approved of senator by any means, but this is the most left-leaning of the Midwestern states, and especially in a presidential election cycle with the incumbent on the Democrat side, it's going to be likely a very safe one for them to keep. Now you have Joni Ernst, the incumbent Republican in Iowa, and her approval numbers just came out, and they were not very good. The Republicans might end up sweating this one, not just in the Senate, but also in terms of the presidential situation. You have a lot of these Democratic candidates spending a ton of money and time spreading that Democratic message throughout the state, and that can have a carryover effect, not just in the presidential election, but also potentially in this Senate race. I think it's going to be extremely close, and the fact that Joni Ernst, her approval numbers just came out and they weren't all that strong, I actually think the Democrats are going to go on and just be able to pick this one up in 2020. Now, part of this is going to be dependent on who they end up nominating, whoever ends up winning that primary. But I actually think the Democrats have a really good shot at picking this one up and think that they can take it from Ernst, given those less solid numbers that we saw from her in terms of approval, disapproval in the third quarter. Moving up to Minnesota, Tina Smith just won her special election in 2018 statewide by around double digits. I expect her to go on and continue to do that in the state of Minnesota, which outside of Illinois, probably the most left-leaning state in all of the Midwest. And then Michigan, you have the incumbency advantage with Gary Peters. Not all that well known necessarily statewide. He has one of the highest numbers of people who don't know who he is in his own home state in comparison to all the other 100 senators. But he has shown he can win statewide, even in years where the Democrats didn't necessarily have a great turnout as a whole. Back in 2014 would have been his last election cycle, which was an extremely bad year for Democratic voter turnout, but he was still able to win his statewide election. We'll see who the Republicans nominate. If it's somebody who's well-known statewide, that could perhaps make things interesting. But at this point in time, I'm going to be giving this one as likely over to the Democrats. Moving down to West Virginia, the Republicans have the incumbent advantage with Shelley Capito, and one of the more Republican-leaning states in the country, going to be pretty safe for them. Virginia, Mark Warner has really strong approval numbers that we just saw, and Virginia has been trending more towards the Democrats, going to be giving this one as safe for the incumbent Democrat to continue to keep that one. Now, Tom Tillis, the incumbent Republican in North Carolina, has some of the lowest overall approval numbers of any of the 100 senators. It actually might be the lowest. I can't remember exactly, but it was really bad numbers. He's underwater. He doesn't have a great incumbency advantage because there's also a ton of people in North Carolina who don't know who he is, kind of like what we see with Gary Peters up in Michigan. And part of this is going to be dependent on who the Democrats nominate. But if I had to stake it at this point in time, the presidential result and the Senate result could end up lining at the end of the day for the Democrats. I see that as a serious possibility. And given how terrible Tillis's numbers were in those approval numbers that we just saw come out for the third quarter, I think the Democrats actually have a really good shot at picking this one up, and I think that they'll be able to take it. All right, so going up into the east and northeast here, we'll start with Delaware. Chris Coons, one of the most conservative Democrats in the Senate. He has a great incumbency advantage here against whoever the Republicans nominate, and then Delaware, of course, a very, in general, left-leaning state. Pretty safe one for him to go on and retain. New Jersey with Cory Booker. His presidential campaign hasn't been going all that well, but if he's running for this Senate seat, it's likely to be very safe for him. Moving up to Rhode Island, Jack Reed, the incumbent Democrat in Rhode Island. Again, a very safe situation in these safer Democratic states here up in the Northeast. And then Massachusetts, Ed Markey, he's actually getting challenged in his primary by Joe Kennedy. But Markey, he had extremely strong approval numbers that just came out in Q3, actually quite a bit stronger than the other Democratic senator from the state, Elizabeth Warren. So that's a really good sign for him to possibly win his primary and then go on and win in the general election. But whether it's Kennedy or Markey running in this one, likely to be very safe for the Democrats. Going up to New Hampshire, in Jeanne Shaheen, her numbers have been looking very strong as we saw them just come out in the third quarter. One of the more approved of senators, which is a really positive sign for her to go on and continue to reclaim, or I keep saying reclaim. It would just be continuing to hold this seat for the Democrats. Of course, if it would be a reclaim, it would be a situation where the Democrats had lost it and then earned it back in that scenario. But this one, going to be giving it as likely to the Democrats, I do think. And it depends on who the Republicans end up nominating. I think if they have a really strong candidate, they could make this one close. But at this point in time, feel like it's likely going to be going to the Democrats with Jan Shaheen. And then going up to Maine, perhaps one of the most interesting races out of all of the 35 scenarios here. And Susan Collins, she might not even win her primary if she ends up getting challenged. We saw some polling out recently in a potential primary matchups for her where she was losing by considerable margins. And actually, with the approval numbers that just came out, she is the second most disapproved of senator, only 1 point behind Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. So if it's a situation where it is Susan Collins against whoever the Democrats put up there, I feel like it's a situation where the Democrats have a really good shot at picking this one up. Maine is a Democratic-leaning state, and there's obviously a lot of disdain for Collins, and it's especially all started right after the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. Since then, we've seen Collins' numbers continuously go down. But that's a situation where I have all 35 seats given out either to the Democrats or Republicans, no putting them in the toss-up section. This is just what I think is going to happen in all of these races, and that would get you to a scenario where you have 51 Democrats, 49 Republicans, and then the vice presidential pick. I think the Democrats have a really good chance at picking up the presidency. So even if it was a 50-50 scenario, they would be able to break the tiebreaker. But if the Republicans are able to win in 2020, as my phone goes off and gives me a reminder here, if the Republicans go on and win in 2020, the Democrats could still possibly win the Senate. But if it's a scenario where the Republicans are winning the presidency, they probably aren't going to do quite as well in some of these competitive Senate races. So that's also something to keep in mind on top of that. For instance, if the Republicans win the presidency in 2020, then that makes things tougher for the Democrats to win states like North Carolina, Iowa, or Arizona, maybe, those ones that could possibly stay with the Republicans. But that's where I currently think things are going as we head towards 2020. And again, I wanted to make this because we just got those recent approval numbers come out, and some of these states saw really weak numbers for their Republican incumbents, specifically Maine, North Carolina, Iowa, Colorado, and Arizona, which are very gettable potentially for the Democrats to try and reclaim the majority in the Senate. So that's going to wrap this one up, guys. I appreciate you stopping by. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and I hope to see you guys back here for future videos.